Welcome to the Water Table. I'm joined here today by Eric Henning, a PhD student at Iowa State University. Working on on getting that DR ahead of his name. So, Eric, thanks a lot for coming on. Want to dive into some of the research, some of the stuff that you've been working on. But first off, welcome to the Water Table, and thanks for hopping on.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Trey. It's great to be here.
Yeah. I got your name from Matt Helmers, and in a previous conversation that we had, and he said, "Hey, you'd be a good candidate for coming on the Water Table, talking about some of the research that you're doing." And then actually had a chance to bump into you at a conference previously and get a little preface for some of that. But maybe we can just kind of dive into it. You're doing some research on drainage district improvements in Iowa. So what? Talk a little bit about that. What's the overview of the project, and what are y'all looking at?
Sure. So to start out, as you may know, and maybe some of the listeners know, the drainage infrastructure in north central Iowa and up there in Minnesota is aging. A lot of it went in 100 plus years ago by hand with a lot less technology. So a lot of these systems maybe are undersized by today's standards. We, have a lot more row crops and a lot more demands out of that land. And then, or they're failing and need repaired. So there was a project that Matt told me about. So I'm one of his grad students, where a little over a decade ago, 10, 15 years ago, they had this idea of like, okay, when we go and improve these drainage districts, when we need to make these repairs for them to be functional, let's upgrade the capacity and then pair a wetland at the outlet. And so we can get kind of like a crop production and water quality win-win situation where you address two needs at once. And so there was 5 districts that they looked at in like Pocahontas, Palo Alto, Clay counties, up kind of north central, northwest Iowa. There's another group of researchers at Iowa State that have been looking at the water quality, the performance of the wetlands, and have shown that these wetlands are on par with other treatment wetlands as far as nitrate removal, even with the increased drainage capacity. But then nobody really looked at some of the other factors like crop production impacts. So that's kind of where I've stepped in a little bit here in the past year.
Yeah, and I want to jump off a little bit on that, talking about that, the infrastructure and kind of the situation at hand, essentially, that we're dealing with. And that was a previous guest that we had on of Chuck Brandel. He mentioned the similar situation in Minnesota. It's infrastructure that's degrading. Like you said, it's been around for 100 years, probably longer than that in some cases, installed by hand. Old concrete and clay pipes, they're starting to break down. They've functioned for the last 100 years and definitely paid for themselves on that. But, at this point, essentially, it's the liability in some cases where when that clay does crack or that concrete does break down, it's sucking soil with it. It's moving all that, sediment and all that soil and stuff right downstream anyway. So that's kind of the opportunity that we're leading into with what was looked at down in Iowa on how can we do some of this stuff differently, put in these wetlands, put in some water storage on these sites, because essentially we're only going to get this chance to upgrade this infrastructure and kind of do it the right way. We have to start doing it a little bit differently, thinking about it a little bit differently, and definitely pairing in that water quality aspect of it too. So that's kind of the other thing with these drainage districts or, county mains or whatever that they are, is, it's an opportunity to have that water in one location where you can route it through a wetland or through some of these treatment practices too. So just wanted to make that point a little bit and, kind of set that stage a little more. And I think, that's something that maybe isn't discussed a whole lot or thought about too much, where it's just, pipe in the ground, like, yeah, it's been there for, for a long time. And it's when we do start looking at updating some of this, the infrastructure we have to be doing it and thinking about it a little bit differently.
Yeah. I mean, like, what an opportunity it is, right? Like, the pipe is already in the ground. It's already there. Let's just make it better on both fronts, water quality and for crops. So, but yeah, just to kind of continue on looking at the crop production impacts. So a couple of things we thought. So it's kind of hard to look across a whole district and compare yields because, those farmers are entitled to keep those yields private, right? But another way to think about it is like, okay, how much crop flooding are we reducing by upgrading the outlets and the district mains and all that? So you can do that by just looking at satellite images. And so that's kind of what I've been working on the past 6 months here is looking for satellite images of these districts in like May and June before and after they had the improvements, and then comparing them to similar districts around, close proximity, similar soil, similar depressional landscape, and saying, okay, before any improvements went in, were they any different? And I found no, they weren't. And then afterwards, the reduction is just like staggering. Like we found about like 75% or higher reduction in surface ponding, which I should also mention. I'm mapping the ponding on clear days, so it's after the storm's already blown through. I'm looking at the ponding like 2+ days after the storm's through. So that water's been there for like 40, it's drowned out the crops pretty good. You might lose that whole portion of the field, and then also, delaying planting and all that. Like, it's really, the way I looked at it is like pretty much super conservative, looking at ponding 2+ days after a storm.
After the rain event, right?
Yeah.
Just to look at what you mentioned with, comparing the different districts, and just make sure I'm kind of understanding this right and I have it right. You're essentially looking at sister districts in the similar watershed, same watershed?
Yeah. So like, for instance, in Palo Alto, we have the north portion of the district that got the improvements, the capacity improvements, and then the south portion of the district that did not.
Yep, and you mentioned similar landscape, similar, cropping systems, and that was from that previous look at what you did is saying, hey, these have similar, essentially, like I said, sister areas that you can make those comparisons. Yeah. One of these districts is getting the improvements, is getting essentially the upgrade to that drainage main. The other one isn't, and then that's how you're comparing the differences. Am I tracking that right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yep.
And then with those improvements, and maybe it's different for each of the sites that you were looking at, is essentially just the mainline improvement, or was there also other, pattern tile or whatever going in those watersheds too, or is it more so just, hey, we're looking at when you do put in that new main or upgrade that old clay or whatever it is to new pipe, that's the difference, or do you have the extent of essentially acres drained, or is it just a new main line?
To my knowledge, it's just new mainline, but adding capacity certainly adds the ability to put in new pattern tile in your fields. And one thing that I think is also important to note is that really, like, because we're getting so much ponding before any improvements, and then upgrading the main just resulted in such a dramatic decrease. It goes to show, like, if you put new pattern tile in that district without enough outlet, it might not do too much.
Exactly.
And so it really shows that, improving those outlets could really, really make a big difference.
Yep. And that's getting that right sizing your whole watershed, whether that watershed is the field that you're designing a drainage system for, or like I said, a county or district watershed with that main too, is you can't, if you have all the laterals in the world, isn't going to matter if your main line's undersized, and kind of vice versa too. And that's kind of interesting. That's what I was just wanted to maybe hit that point, or kind of ask that question for, how undersized that these mains are, where if you just relieve that pressure that's on them, and then that allows the rest of the water upstream, to get relieved and keep moving. The other question or other point that I want to ask too is on when you're talking about ponded area, ponded land. This is crop land that's, it's been worked, it's been fertilizer put on it, it's been planted. This isn't just the, cattails in some wetland or whatever that you're analyzing. This is just water sitting on cropland that's already being farmed, correct?
Yes. Thanks for pointing that out. So yeah, I'm isolating corn and soybean fields. I'm not looking at anything else. So, because yeah, it'd be pretty unfair if I was comparing ponding with one district that has a bunch of wetlands and CRP to one that doesn't. But yeah, I'm isolating out just straight corn and soybean, and then taking like a percentage of that cropped area in the district that's been ponded, in May or June when I'm looking at. I can find a satellite image for it.
And essentially, that's what you're finding pretty consistently is after those improvements, it reduces that ponding by 70+%.
Yep. So, and again, to like put that into perspective, like, let's say you have a 2,000 acre district. So for instance, one that I was looking at, in about half of the years in the past 20 years, 10 out to 20 years, there's an average of 5% of the cropland that was ponded at some point in May and June. So that would be 100 acres that might be completely lost. If you reduce that by 75%, you go down to 25 acres. So, 75 acres isn't anything to sneeze at when you talk about like complete crop failure potentially.
Yeah, and you can make the argument, and I have in the past of like I said, those are also acres that you're paying rent on, or you're paying your taxes on. You're already applying fertilizer there. You're applying your chemical. This is stuff that you're already invested in many times, and then all you need to do is have the weather work out right. And then in those years that don't, then then you're seeing those losses, and that's also leading to the other issues of that fertilizer, those nutrients have to go somewhere as well. They're usually going downstream with the water too. So there's an argument on the environmental side of being able to utilize utilize everything that you put down, for that fertilizer and stuff like that. So growing healthy crops has that benefit of consistent yields for the consistent yields across the board, and also having being able to have all that ground covered too, and not drown out, sitting in weeds, and having to go back in there and replant or do a whole bunch of other stuff with it too. So. Oh, maybe it's just hitting a tough spot right now. That's what we had to deal with here pretty much this last summer down in southern Minnesota too. So, fresh memories.
Yeah. Well, shoot. So, I started working on this project in like 2018, 2019 were kind of like my big years that I was looking for stuff. And then I went up to Okoboji like 4th of July and was able to see some of the damage in that neck of the woods. And then, it was like bittersweet where I'm like, ooh, more data for me to look at to get my point across. But like, man, it is devastated up here.
Right. Awesome. Yeah. Well, and sorry, I keep kind of sidetracking us on going through this research, but anything else with that, with what you've been looking at for those drainage district improvements?
Yeah. So like I said, with the ponding, and I think, just mapping ponding, it's kind of like a conservative estimate of potential economic loss. Another thing that we were looking at was ET, so evaporation and transpiration throughout the year in the improved districts. And so kind of our hypothesis was maybe that you'd see more evaporation without improvements because you'd have more surface water and it's just wetter conditions because it's not being able to drain earlier in the year. And then potentially you might see higher transpiration in the districts with improvements later on in the year because those roots were able to go down deeper, be a more vigorous crop. Unfortunately, like I said, we didn't have very many wet years in our data set, so we didn't see those differences too much. There was a little bit of of an indicator that there's more evaporation without good drainage. So, and that's really just saying that it's kind of verifying that surface water ponding mapping was correct.
Gotcha.
It kind of goes hand in hand. Yeah.
Yep. And like you said, that ET, that's evaporation. So that's essentially your ponded areas releasing water through regular evaporation. Then transpiration, that's the crops kind of breathing out water. Is that correct?
Yep. So they just they like to put them together because it's hard to measure them, two separate things.
Gotcha.
But yeah, it's just water going into the atmosphere.
Yep. And then, with that transpiration, you said, you'd obviously see, or you'd hope that you would see more of that with essentially more crops, less ponding, more transpiration.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So, like I said, the idea was maybe we would see in areas with better drainage, they could transpire more water in the hot months when they need it. That means like they have more water available because the roots are going down deeper, and it's just a healthier crop. Like I said, we didn't really see those results yet right now.
How are you measuring that?
Yeah, so that's a good question. We use this satellite-based data set called OpenET. So there's a group. It's really big out west because they really care about measuring how much water they're losing to the atmosphere. Where they put together this free data set where they basically measure like cooling of the atmosphere and kind of translate that into ET. So there'd be the temperature would be lower on the surface if it's evaporating, like how you sweat, like and how it cools you down. And so it's a good tool, I think, to kind of be able to estimate some of that stuff for free. Maybe it's not completely accurate, but especially when you're looking at like trends or comparing things side by side, it gives you a good idea.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's good to have those tools available to use in a lot of different applications, like set out west. That's what we're seeing with a lot of the irrigated lands and all the water issues that are out there. Like a lot of what we're seeing in the Midwest and have seen for a long time is, hey, we have too much water, we don't know what to do with it. Trying to put it all downstream, and out west they're looking for ways to hold more and to hang on to more. So it's water issues just a little bit differently, and that's kind of something interesting that we're starting to get looking at a little bit more as an industry, and hopefully talking with some other experts on some of that, and maybe that leads into a little bit of what you mentioned coming up here with some other research that you're looking at with drainage water recycling.
Yeah. So. Me and Matt and Chris Hay, another drainage scientist, we've been and others. We've been looking at drainage water recycling systems. So there's 3 farmers in central Iowa who we work with who have installed these drainage water recycling systems, and the way that Matt likes to describe it is it's like a rain barrel on steroids. So you're routing tile into a big pond that you build in the spring. So you're holding on to water, keeping it, rather than just, letting it go downstream, getting it off. But, still draining so you can get in and plant and everything. But then holding on to that water so that in July and August, when you might need a little bit, you pump it back through a pivot or a sub-irrigation system. And then you can kind of, again, it's like a win-win type situation where, okay, since we're holding our drainage, preventing all those nutrients from going downstream, and then we're putting them back on the field when we need to put it back on the field, when it could be beneficial. So kind of a water quality, crop production win-win potentially.
Yep, and in those basins, like you mentioned, having some treatment with nitrogen, phosphorus, letting sediment settle out, and some of that stuff too. And looking at some other documents, it's only like maybe 1 to 5% of essentially of your drained areas that you need to have for that basin or for that settling pond. So, the percentage of land that you're essentially taking out of production for that basin is usually low land anyway. It's fairly minimal compared to the benefits that you get with, essentially all it is putting on irrigation, or essentially, irrigated benefit. But like I said, you get those environmental benefits of having, storing that water, slowing everything down, and treating some of that and being able to put that back on later in the year when you're dry.
Yeah. And really, like, as far as digging these storage ponds, like of the 3 sites that we have monitoring, one of them, they wanted an outlet for the pattern tile that they were going to put in. They didn't have a good outlet, so they dug a pond. And it was a low-lying spot in the field that didn't produce very well anyway. Another kind of similar story, they had a corner that just was always wet, always a problem, and they were interested in routing tile to that and then pumping it back. And then another was just it was a pasture kind of tucked between a cattle lot and a crop field. And it's just, it was just like perfect. It was right at the end of a county main, so they had some clay there on site too that they could line the whole thing with. So there's a lot of you can get creative with where you put these ponds. It's not like you're taking out your best land to put it in.
Yeah, and that's what, there's no great cookie cutter approach on that. And it's I know talking with a few other folks too of what's the average cost, or what's the estimated input, and all this other stuff. We're like, well, it depends on everything. That what you have available for your water source. If you already have a pivot, you want to do a sub irrigation system. Do you have stuff on site to build berms or have that clay and line everything, or where you're putting your pond, how much water you have coming in, how much do you need? So a lot of those questions that are hopefully going to be able to get sorted out here in the near future to get better estimates, to be able to invest in some of this infrastructure a little bit differently, more kind of above ground infrastructure with some of these pivots. But definitely something that's interesting to, like we talked about earlier, is do something a little bit different. We've coming out of a handful of years of drought down southern Minnesota and Iowa, and I know this spring was really wet. And then now it's dry again here as we're recording this in late September, and has been for a little while. So, how can we be looking at water use differently, of not just getting rid of it all the time? How can we hang on to it, have a little bit of that treatment for those nutrients, be able to use that water later on in the year? And I think that's something that seems to be gaining some steam with this drainage water recycling, and that's kind of tip of the hat to folks down in Iowa, and a lot of yourself and the researchers that you're working with on some of this stuff too. So that's always seems to be kind of the up and coming practice that's out there, and it's just a little bit expensive to get rolling with it.
Well, and there's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot going on, but another thing that we kind of talked about before we started, but having this water kind of allows you to be creative in other ways, where, like, we work with a farmer, and he so the one that has the cattle lot, he puts on cover crops in the fall, and then he can give the cover crops water if they need it, because right now we're dry. He's probably gonna put on water onto his rye to get it started. And so that, it just gives him more use for that land. He puts nitrogen through his pivot to kind of be a little bit more efficient with his fertilization. So it's just like there's a lot of possibilities out there for putting this infrastructure in, and kind of maybe intensifying the water management to really be efficient in all aspects, in crop production and water quality.
Right, just gives you more flexibility with everything that you're doing. Be able to really dial in your use of water and fertilizer and whatever else for some of these applications that are likely going to also be up and coming. So it gives you a lot of flexibility and a lot of ways to adapt and make sure that you have what you need on site all the time. Well, awesome. Kind of wrapping up here a little bit. I forgot to ask you, where'd you do your undergrad, and where are you from?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm actually from West Des Moines. So Grew up in the suburbs, but I've always had family always involved in agriculture. Grandparents lived on farms, and parents custom farmed some land outside town. So
Sure.
was always interested in agriculture. Always interested in the environment, hunting, fishing, and just enjoying the outdoors. Went to University of Nebraska Lincoln for my undergrad. So I should mention my dad's side of the family is all from Nebraska, and I'm like a huge Husker fan.
Sure.
And so I wanted to go to Lincoln. Ended up getting involved in biosystems engineering, ag engineering. Worked in a manure lab for a while, doing some kind of soil health stuff with manure application. But yeah, just like also took some irrigation courses over there, which has paid off now in my current role.
Right.
But then like towards the end of undergrad, was able to connect with Matt Helmers, and he had an opening, and it really excited me. So I've been over here in Ames for 4 years now.
Nice. Right on. Yeah, that's what I was curious on, coming from Lincoln, coming from Nebraska, and what how that transition back to Iowa State was like.
Yeah. And it's funny, so I took a irrigation and drainage engineering class in Lincoln, and we get a big textbook that says irrigation and drainage engineering, and then first week the professor says, okay, we might do a week of drainage, but probably not, because 80% of the state is here,
Yep.
So much of the state is irrigated. So didn't get my drainage education until I came back here.
Right on. And I guess like you said, been involved on ag and some of this research and stuff here for your career and most of your life. What gets you excited about looking forward into kind of the future of water and agriculture and some of that stuff that you're getting involved with? Maybe other than the stuff that we already mentioned, but what else? Where do you see kind of the industry going that way?
Well, I would say, it relates to the stuff we talked about earlier today, but just that ability to like really be precise and like kind of maximize every acre. Like precision ag has been a term that's been used for a while, but I think in we can kind of do precision ag with water too, where, okay, maybe this wet spot, we can either drain it better or we can turn it back to a wetland and get some water quality benefits. And really we can, with technology and everybody just being more knowledgeable and having more access to information, I think, we can really kind of maximize everything. We don't have to have just crop production at the expense of water quality or water quality at the expense of crop production. I think there's definitely an avenue for both, which that's what excites me and gets me going as like a young person in this field.
Yeah, awesome. Hey, that's me and you both. That's well said. I think it's a lot of opportunities out there to keep dialing and everything, and make better decisions with more information that we're getting. So awesome. Well, again, appreciate having you on, taking the time out of your day to sit down and talk through some of this stuff and maybe promote your research a little bit and some of the cool things that you're working on. So thanks a lot for coming on and being on the water table here.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It was a lot of fun.
Awesome. Appreciate it. Thanks, Eric.